1. The White House sits at the apex of an inverted pentagram formed by its nearby streets and intersections. 2. Rick Campbell from DCSymbols.com shows how this much more complicated shape fits over the monuments as well. It's a pentagram within a cube within a pyramid, which can also be seen as a flower of life diagram. 3. If we think of the pyramid in this diagram as relating to the unfinished pyramid on the dollar bill, which is capped by the all-seeing eye of Providence, its pupil lines up with the headquarters of Scottish Freemasonry, also known as the House of the Temple. 4. A hexagram can also be drawn over DC in units of 1 royal mile with the Jefferson Memorial, White House, and the Temple on its central nodes. These measurements directly link DC to the New Jerusalem described in the Bible. And 5. A tree of life diagram also fits well over various traffic circles and points across the DC map. Specifically, the curving shape of the streets in Scott Circle matches the shape of the Pythagorean Y, which is in the location of the hidden doth in the Tree of Life. Top 5 secret symbols hidden in the map.
So what is it?
The White House is placed on a giant pentagram road structure. The White House.
After reading the lost symbol, I was intrigued with Washington, D.C. It's a city overflowing with esoteric symbolism. Zooming in from space as we can in Google Earth, let me point out a few landmarks. Here's the White House, Capitol Building, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, and the Pentagon just across the Potomac. Rick Campbell has uncovered much of the underlying geometry of the city on his informative site DCSymbols.com. He sees the following diagram in the streets and interconnection of monuments. The geometry consists of a pentagram over a cube, all contained within an overarching pyramid. Each one of these shapes carries a meaning we'll be exploring. We'll see later in Egypt how the pentagram symbolizes the microcosm, which is everything in the universe, human scale or smaller. The cube is a recurrent esoteric symbol for the body that we'll be running into all over the world. I found a pair of 3, 4, 5 triangles between the cube and the pyramid. Turning off the cube layer, you see the rectangle surrounding the White House is if we illuminate the DC pyramid with the same all-seeing eye of Providence, we are directed to a specific building. Is this the Eye of Providence we are looking at, or its older incarnation as the Eye of Horus? Either way, what is behind the all-seeing eye of the sun? It's the headquarters of Scottish Freemasonry, which goes by many names, including the Supreme Council, Mother Council of the World, and House of the Temple. This building is loaded with Egyptian symbolism, with a 13-step unfinished pyramid on top, just like on the dollar bill, and 2 giant sphinxes flank the entrance out front. The architect John Russell Pope modeled the 1911 building after the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, now a part of Turkey. As one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, it served as tomb of King Mausolus, which is where we get the word mausoleum. The House of the Temple correspondingly serves as tomb of Albert Pike, Sovereign Grand Commander, Confederate General, and the most famous Freemason of his times. Pike wrote Morals and Dogma, the handbook formerly given to new members up until 1974, which details the 33 ranks of Freemasonry. The House of the Temple is where the climax in the lost symbol takes place. Campbell shows how the elevation was designed ad quadratum, which is Latin for by the square. Ad quadratum is a sacred design template we'll see employed in the District of Columbia itself and at Chartres Cathedral. The sunburst above the entry is at the center of the square, and the top corner marks the symbolic apex of the unfinished pyramid. The bottom corner presumably marks the crypt where Pike is interred. Scottish Freemasons are really into the number 33. There are 33 columns in the House of the Temple that are 33 feet high. This is the place where a hard-working initiate can attain the highest 33rd degree from the 33 members of the Supreme Council. 33rd degree Masons are often found in positions of power. Many presidents of the United States were Freemasons. The Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania has a permanent exhibit featuring the portrait and signature of each of these presidents, with a record of their Masonic careers. It is difficult to verify Masonic membership because some members do not make their involvement a matter of public record. However, each lodge keeps its own records. I find it interesting that George Washington, Harding, Eisenhower, Carter, and the younger Bush all chose to be sworn into the office of the President with a hand on this Masonic Bible dating from 1770. One has to be male and believe in a supreme being to seek membership as a Scottish Freemason. They insist their fraternity is not a religion, although atheists are ineligible for membership. Freemasonry is not a secret society, but members are strongly admonished under pain of death not to reveal core secrets. Much of what happens inside the house of the temple has been pieced together by outside researchers in recent years, and this has been brought forward in Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol. Members can rise to the 32nd degree through hard work and study, but only those selected by the Supreme Council may attain the highest 33rd degree. David Oveson's groundbreaking book, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, reveals that D.C. has more zodiacs than any city in the world, concentrated in what is called the Federal Triangle. The Federal Triangle contains many important governmental structures, including the National Archives, the National Post Office, the Departments of Justice and Commerce, and so on. Most importantly, Oveson shows how these Federal Triangle zodiacs draw attention to one constellation in particular, Virgo. Virgo the Virgin is an esoteric representation of Isis. Oveson's research into Masonic symbolism led him to map the stars Arcturus, Regulus, and Spica to a terrestrial triangle connecting the White House, Capitol building, and the point where many think the Washington Monument was supposed to be. You see, the Washington Monument is shifted slightly to the east with respect to the White House Jefferson Memorial north-south axis. Some claim this shift was due to the fact that the marked point is on landfill, and the site where the monument was actually built is on solid ground. In any case, here is that particular stellar arrangement brought down to earth. We see Virgo over the Federal Triangle and Leo over the Capitol building. 18th century Masonic French astronomer Jérôme Lalande wrote, "The Virgin is consecrated to Isis, just as Leo is consecrated to her husband Osiris." So Isis is linked with the Federal Triangle and Osiris with the Capitol building. The Virgin's right hand points to the White House, but her left hand is actually on the Washington Monument. This is very interesting to those who know the Isis story. Could Isis be holding Osiris's form of the Washington Monument? As the ancient Egyptian story goes, it all started when Set became jealous of his brother Osiris, who was king of all Egypt, and whose girlfriend was the beautiful Isis. Set then deceived and killed Osiris, cut his body into 14 parts, sealed all but one of them in a coffin, and sent it down the Nile. As a final insult, he tossed Osiris's penis into the river. His sister consort Isis was at length able to recover and magically reconnect all of Osiris's parts, except for his penis, which was unfortunately eaten by a fish. Isis fashioned a golden phallus, attached it to Osiris, and brought him back to life with a song. From this experience, the resurrected Osiris became Lord of the Dead. Isis was impregnated with the golden phallus, and their son Horus grew to become god of the sun. It's the original story of sex and violence, jealousy, incest, and pregnancy. The Washington Monument is an obvious phallic symbol. The Vesica Pisces paths surrounding the obelisk suggest female genitals. Taken together, the symbols represent the joining of Osiris and Isis, and the conception of the sun god Horus. Now maybe you think I'm going too far at this point, but take a look at what is above the elevator that goes up the shaft of the Washington Monument, the same ride Robert Langdon took at the end of the lost symbol. Right above the elevator doors there is a bronze sculpture of George Washington, sculpted by French Freemason Houdon, and above that is the winged disc of Horus. What in the world does this Egyptian solar symbol have to do with America? It's a clue to the secret meaning of the obelisk, in the most public of places, but how many actually see it and understand?
Where that's where the stone.
The White House is placed on a giant pentagram road structure. The White House.
So what is it, and where does it lead? First, the Masonic compass. This points to the White House. The White House is the base point on the pentagram. But that's not all. The White House also sits at the base of another key Masonic symbol, the unfinished pyramid. The unfinished pyramid is the symbol depicted on the dollar bill, with the so-called all-seeing eye at the top. Back in D.C., remarkably, the street outline does something similar. Travel directly north from the White House, up the pyramid, to the center of the all-seeing eye, and there can be found a building. It is indeed a temple in the form of an unfinished pyramid. This is the temple of the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree Freemasonry.
Check out what's built in the streets of Washington, D.C. United States Capitol, Capitol Hill. Check out.
Has anyone ever known?
Hey TikTok,
So we're going to be going over aerial architecture of Washington, D.C. in this particular video. And those who aren't familiar with the aerial view of Washington, D.C., as well as the ground level of Washington, D.C., there is obvious occultic secret symbolism all over the place. As in this image here, we can see the Capitol building being at the center of what looks to be like the exact representation of the Freemasonic owl. It may seem like a stretch at first glance that something like that owl could be so perfectly in plain sight from an aerial perspective, but if anyone who has been to Washington, D.C. or has looked at their own, through their own research on the internet of these images, it becomes quite apparent of how obvious these symbols are, such as pentagrams, stars, triangles, and square and compasses, all pointing back to a Freemasonic upbringing of Washington, D.C. itself. The Pentagon stands as another testament of aerial architecture and deep thought being put into the aerial architecture, as well as the geometrical architecture itself, with it being on September 11th that it first started its construction, and September 11th was the date it was actually hit in 2001. As well as previous in this particular video, and through independent research you can do yourself, it's not hard to understand that the Scottish Rite would be centered at the top of all of this overhead architecture from the aerial perspective, and it playing, a major role in the entire layout of what you're seeing visually. Other symbols such as the phallic Washington Monument, which is shown throughout several different areas of the world, is also more evidence. With such immaculate detail to these structures, statues, and monuments, etc., and the Scottish Rite being literally the pinnacle of what you would be seeing on this architectural layout, it most definitely begs the question of any